I had a display here of kind of examples of what I'll be talking about today, but apparently the input isn't cooperating. So I have a printout, so I'll probably hold them up to you guys so you can see them. So maybe I'll pass them around too. Maybe halfway through the panel we'll get that working. But so this panel is about making comics. It was going to be me and Seth Talley here. He's a writer. I'm a comic book artist, but he couldn't make it, so you're stuck with just me today. My name is Shawn McCauley. I've worked on comics professionally with Xenoscope, Marcosia. I've done Grim Fairy Tales with Xenoscope. I've done Monster Hunter Survival Guide with them. I've done, I don't know if any of you have heard Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. I just finished doing that book with Moonstone, and that should be coming out this month and next month. I also write and draw my creator-owned comic, Shadows of Oblivion, and I also co-created and do the art for Dalek the Mighty, which Seth writes if he was here. You can imagine Seth sitting there. So I'm just going to go through the process of how to make a comic book, from just coming up with your idea to all the way through lettering. And just out of curiosity, how many of you guys want to write comics? And how many of you want to pencil comics? And inkers? Oh, some inkers out there, okay. And colorists? And who wants to just do it all? They just want to write? Oh, you poor souls. Because that's what I do, and it's not easy. It's very, very difficult. The first thing I want to kind of hammer home to you guys is you don't need any kind of software to make comics. I've heard a lot of times people need, oh, I would love to make comics, but I don't have Photoshop, but I just can't do it without Photoshop. Or I don't have this, that, the other thing, and if only I had that software, I'd finally be able to make comics. Comics have been around for over a century. Like, they were making them before computers were even a thing. So if they were able to make comics without a computer, you guys can too. So I don't want you guys to think that the only thing holding you back is software, because there's photocopiers, there's, if you have a pencil and a piece of paper, you can start making books. So that's the one thing I don't want any of you to think, like, oh, this is all great, but I just don't have a computer to do this with. So as long as you have paper and pencil, you can make a comic book. So the first thing when you're making a comic is you have to come up with the idea, which seems pretty obvious, but I always heard countless excuses of, oh, I have this idea for this one thing, but it's very much like X. Like, I have an idea for a zombie story, but you know, there's The Walking Dead. It's not an original idea, but The Walking Dead isn't an original idea. There's been, how many zombie movies have there been? How many vampire stories? How many, space, just stories that take place in space, you know? Like, so it doesn't matter if you think your idea has been done before. It's not important what your idea is. Generally, it's the specifics. It's how you tell the story. It's the characters, just how you tell the story. All these things will make your story, even though it might be similar, it might be the same kind of genre as another kind of story, you can still make it your own. And that's kind of where the main idea from, where your idea comes from. The most important thing is you want something you're passionate about, something that you just really want to tell this story. If you kind of just take away the story, or you don't really know what to do, you're like, oh, I kind of want to tell a story. It's not really been done before, but I'm not really into it, you're not going to be able to tell a good story about that. So that's the primary thing. So once you kind of have your idea, you have to start coming up with the plot. So when I plot out my story, and I have a little info thing, a little graphic about this, but I have this corkboard. It's just a big corkboard, and I have little pins of note cards stuck to it. On each note card is an idea. It's a plot point, a character. It could be several different things, but So the reason why I put it on note cards is it allows me to move things around. You want to make sure that you're, you want to get every idea down. You want to, nothing is too stupid or too silly for your ideas. You want to get it down because they can always be modified, they can be changed, they can, might inform something later. So, like I move things around, I might draw a plot, I might come back to the story and say, you know, this really isn't working. This whole thing seems very contrived and I'm gonna take these parts out. So instead of scribbling it out in a notebook, I can just literally just take the cards down. And I don't throw out those cards, I keep them because you never know when that idea might fit into a later part of a story or a totally different story. So you wanna make sure you keep all your ideas. Don't be afraid to cut anything. It's really, people often have this really great idea in their head and they're, I just don't want to get rid of this. I'm really proud of this idea. But it just ruins the story or the flow of the story and all that stuff. So you want to make sure that you can cut whatever it is for the sake of the story. That's your primary concern, is the story. Everything has to serve the story. Even if you love this character, if they're just cumbersome, get rid of them. You don't want to do any of that stuff. So that's the basic with the plot. So then we have, let's see here. I don't know if anyone can see. I have these little thumbnails drawn. So basically, I have little thumbnails with little notes drawn in them. It tells me, it informs how I should organize the panels of the comic, the pages of the comic. You want to make sure that you're, basically, you want to make sure that nothing falls on a weird page. You have your panels on the, for instance, I'll give you a good example. Have you ever read a comic where it has a big double page spread, where it's one big image, it spreads across the whole thing? If you're writing your story and the first page of that lands on an odd number page, it's not going to work because that means they have to flip the page to be able to look at the other side of the image. So you have to be able to thumbnail out everything so that you have, you know that this page will read the way it's supposed to read. For instance, another example is you kind of have cliffhangers. I'm sure you've all read comics and manga where you're on a page and it's like, what is that? And you just really want to turn the page to see what happens next, right? I see a lot of nods there. So you want to make sure you're writing your story so that lands on an even number, even odd, yeah. So you want to make sure that lands on the page so when you turn it, it makes a lot of sense. If you put that on the left side, it's not going to make any sense because you can just peek over, you're like, oh, that's what they're looking at. That's not that enticing or exciting. Now, also when you're plotting out your book, it's really, really important to organize your panels, and that's actually the next thing. You want to start laying out your panels. So we have these loose panels here. And for those of you who can see, you probably notice that it's just a scribbled mess, right? So you just need these to kind of figure out where the pacing is going to be. You want to make sure that your panels read from left to right. And I know a lot of you are big fans of manga here. I mean, it is Animazement. And fan comics usually make their comics read from right to left, like in a manga. Wanting to be, what I often hear is, I want it to be like authentic. But in the Japanese culture, their language reads from right to left. That's why their comics read from right to left. If you're writing a comic that is in English, you want your comic to read from left to right. It doesn't matter if you're doing it in a style that's kind of anime or manga-ish. You still want it to be left to right. So it doesn't matter if you're doing it in a style that's kind of anime or manga-ish. You still want it to be left to right so it reads right. You want the panels to move in the direction of the language that you're reading. So I'm kind of blowing through this so far. So Have I lost any of you yet? Anyone? No? Good? Yes? Okay. All right. This is so much easier when you have someone else up here. So you have your layouts, you have your thumbnails, you have your ideas, you have your corkboard full of plot. You need to actually write a script at this point. So again, we have this fun little example of one of my scripts. The way I organize my scripts is I have my pages, the panels, what happens in the panels, and who says what in the panels. The reason why you want to organize it like that is so when the artist, especially if you're just a writer, if you're doing it all yourself, you might not need to be this specific, but if you're just a writer and you're working with an artist, you want to make sure that you are descriptive as possible so there's no guesswork involved. But you also want to leave a little bit of room for the artist to play with. So you don't want to write like a whole page of a description just for one panel. And you want to describe the entire scene as far as dialogue. So the artists, when they're drawing their panels, they know how much space to leave for word balloons. And I'll talk about that in a second. When Seth writes scripts for me, he leaves it not ambiguous, but he usually gives me 4 panels per page with the idea that I will probably add or subtract panels depending on how the scene dictates. And he actually, I had to write something down because he wanted me to emphasize a certain thing with writers and artists. He wanted me to really, really emphasize how collaboration is key. You might be a writer, you might have this story, it's your baby, you've been just writing it and developing it, and it's just something that's just really dear to you. And you give it to an artist, and you might have this urge to really control what they draw and how they draw it. You have to let go of that. You have to, it's a collaborative media, comics. You have to really trust the artist. If you're working with this artist, it has to be because you trust them, you like their artwork, and you just like how they tell a story. So if you really just like don't want to let go and you want to have complete control of your comic, you either have to draw it yourself or don't make it a comic, make it a book, like make it a novel. That way all your words are exactly the way you want them to be. Otherwise you have to just let it go. So you wanted me to hammer home that you have to just be collaborative, be open to ideas. The artist might come back to you and say, I really like this page, but I think it would make more sense if there was 3 more panels and instead of high angle, we were low, and the character said, what? Instead of, oh no, whatever, it doesn't matter. So you have to make sure that you want to collaborate and that you can let go of that sort of thing. So next we have pencils. Finally, it's out of the writer's hands. So to the artist. The artist is going to start with some pencils. Now, my pencils are pretty loose. This is from my comic Shadows of Oblivion, which I write and draw and all that, ink and everything. I pencil really loose because I am inking myself, and I'm going to add my own tones. If I was working with a company or just a team where someone else would be inking, I would have to ink much, much tighter because the inker, you can't leave anything up to guesswork with the inker. Inkers are not mind readers. They're really good with their craft, but they don't know what you're thinking. So if you're really scribbling and really loose, they might not know what line you're trying to ink. And they might ink the wrong lines and inadvertently ruin your pencil work. So if you're working with a team of artists and you're the penciler, you're working with inkers and colors, you want to try to be as clean and neat as you can so the other artists don't have to guess. They know what they have to do to create the best art possible. So now this, I just pencil with a 2H pencil. I use a 2mm lead. But another example, if maybe you don't really like that kind of penciling, you can always use a blue non-photo pencil. Now, each pencil kind of has its advantages and disadvantages. The advantage to the blue line is that it doesn't reproduce in a photocopier. So if you were very, very loose with your pencils, but you used a non-photo blue pencil, you can then draw over it with a regular pencil and have really clean, neat lines to send to your inker. Or if you were inking yourself, it's less confusing when you have these blue lines to kind of determine what lines you should ink and what you want to do, because the black lines will show up much better over the blue. And I actually have an example of that here. So here's the same page again, but with inks over it. And you can kind of see how it's really cleaned up. So that kind of brings us to inking now. The inker's job, well, let me say, has anyone seen Chasing Amy? Okay, so you guys know the joke about inkers, right? Inkers aren't tracers. Their job isn't to just trace the line art. Their job is to bring life to the pencils. They bring depth. They use line width. They do a lot of things to just clean up and sharpen the artwork. And their job is to do this for not only the colors, but for printing. Printing black lines is neater and just cleaner in a reproduction than any kind of pencil lines. And I have seen comics that were not inked. They use just pencil lines and reproduce it, but unless the penciler and the colorist are really in sync with each other, you end up with a really muddy mess. So I don't recommend that unless you really have a good sense of what you're doing. Lots of practice and all that fun stuff. So, and here's without the blue lines, here's just the cleaned up inking drawing. So that's for all of you guys. So now you've written the story, it's all penciled, it's all inked. The next stage is either the tones or the colors. Now, Shadows of Oblivion is a black and white comic. I like to add tones to it. So here's the tone version, it's the same art here. And I know you in the back probably can't see it very well. If you guys come by my table in Artist Alley after this, I'll let you guys look at these close up. So I use tones, and a lot of manga that you read uses tones. It kind of further brings out depth to your artwork. It gives it a little sense of lighting, a sense of, kind of gives it more of a 3D fleshed out feeling if you're doing it right. Now, if you're coloring though, you have to have a slightly different approach. Most professionals, they either themselves or they have an assistant that puts in the flat colors. So, where do my flat colors go? So we have the line art here with just some flat colors. And it's basically like a coloring book. You stay inside the lines, you pick just one color, and you just fill it in. Now, I use Photoshop to color. Actually, more recently, I've been using Manga Studio to color my work. No matter what you use, though, the process is the same. You still kind of want to throw down the flat colors, and then once you have the flat colors, you can add in the highlights and the shadows, and that kind of, really the same thing as the tones. It gives it more depth. It kind of gives it more of a 3D feeling based on your how you color. Now, you don't have to necessarily, I have more of a gradient kind of style. You can color with just flat colors. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't know if any of you read Hellboy comics. Those comics are purely flat colors. They're not any highlights and shadows thrown in there. I have to really stress this with the coloring. Don't color your work unless you've studied color theory or you at least have some sense of what you're doing. And I know that sounds kind of mean and just blunt, but I've seen some beautifully drawn comics ruined with colors. It's heartbreaking. And I had a graphic of I tried to color that piece I just showed you guys with the ugliest colors I can, and it just makes your eyes want to bleed. And there's nothing wrong with colors. Obviously, I like black and white, but it really, stick with black and white unless you really feel like you're strong with the coloring. Or even if you are going to color, you definitely want color, but you feel like you don't have a strong sense of light and shadows and all that stuff, stick with flat colors. There is nothing wrong with flat colors. Comic books had flat colors up and through the 90s. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a perfectly okay way to color. Let's see where I am here. So we have tones, we have colors. All right, last but not least, we got letters. I know everyone kind of doesn't really think about the lettering. They just think, oh yeah, I just, type what I want them to say, put a little balloon around it, fine, that's great. Fonts really, really matter. It changes, if you use New Times Roman as the font for your comic, it's not gonna look professional. And again, just like colors, it will ruin a beautiful comic book page. You might be the best comic book artist that has ever graced this earth, and you letter your comic with New Times Roman, no one's going to take it seriously. It seems so silly, but it's very, very true. And worse than New Times Roman, for love of everything comics, don't use Comic Sans. Please, please, please don't use Comic Sans. It's a fun comic font. There's a lot of, I don't know if any of you guys watch the YouTube channel Vsauce. There was an episode where they defended Comic Sans, and there was good reasons why Comic Sans exists, but there's better reasons of why never to use it in your comics. So don't use Comic Sans. If you're serious about making comics, I highly recommend going and buying a font that's just really good for your book. They're not that expensive. They can range from $15. There are some expensive ones that can be $50 or more, but I recommend going to Blambot, going to comicbookfonts.com. Any of those fonts those sites have great fonts that are professionally designed for comic books. And it's totally worth it. A little bit of money will go a long, long way. For making your comic look professional and people actually taking it seriously. And so once you've done that, you've outlined everything, you've thumbnailed it, you wrote it out, penciled, inked it, colored it or toned it, lettered it, you have a comic book page. Now you have to repeat that 22 plus times to get a comic book. Yay. Yes, that's why I have pity for all of you that want to do it all yourself. That's a lot of work that I know from experience. So that's the basic process of making a comic. So I kind of want to, I think we're about halfway through now, so I would love to open up the floor to anyone who has questions about making comics, how to get your comics out there, anything you might want to know about making comics. So we'll start right over here.
Question I have is, when it comes to putting together a story, I know a lot, I'm not sure if it's a lot of us out here or just me, but I personally can come up with good ideas, but cannot organize them with a good sequence of events.
Okay, so that's where the note cards will really come in handy. If you have good ideas, it doesn't matter if they're out of order, just write down your ideas on little individual note cards. And the note cards, since they're not like in a notebook, they're not stuck in a specific order, you can move them around and you can say, I have this idea and this idea and this idea, and they just seem random. You can start laying them out and be like, well, what if this happened and then this happened? And then how would I get from this point to this point? And you can kind of start crafting a story, building it like that. And then you can figure out, well, they're in space, but then I want to have this fight on a lava planet. How would I get there? And then you can write out a couple cards for those ideas of how they would get to that point. And after a little while, you have the story kind of coming to light. So we'll start front and then we'll move to the back.
Okay.
Yes, Pikachu.
I had talked to my art teacher about different materials that we could use. What would be the best paper to use? What kind of you're going to ink it in, you're going to use what kind of ink would you use? What kind of pen would you use? You're going to use an actual change, a quill, an actual quill pen that you can just change the heads on, or would you use a fountain pen that has different heads, and what kind of like for colors, comic markers?
Did they have a answer for you?
She gave me 2 different brands for comic markers, and as far as the ink goes, she said India ink.
Yeah, India ink is really good ink, but honestly, anything is fine. Like if it makes the line that you like, you can use it. I went to a comic convention once where I met an inker who used a broken chopstick dipped into well ink to ink his artwork. So the result is the artwork. Like it's for a comic book, you can't think of your artwork, each page, as a precious piece of art that will be hung in a museum. And the way, how you treat that page is important. It is important, don't get me wrong, but like the end result is the comic book. That's what your goal is. So whatever it takes to get the lines that you want on the page to get it printed in a book, that's works. So I use a lot of zebra pens. I think the brand is Kuretake, and their zebra pens are just like brush pens. They're kind of a mix between a paintbrush and a felt tip marker. Lately, I've been doing a lot of digital inking. As far as colors though, Copics work, color pencils work, watercolors work, anything, as long as it looks the way you want it to look, that's fine. That's all that matters. I find personally Bristol board works best for surfaces to draw on. But again, if you have a really rough watercolor paper that gets that texture that you're looking for, that works good too. So in the end, as long as it looks the way you want it to look, use whatever it takes to get that.
What about preventing smearing? I have a terrible habit of dragging my hand across.
With smearing pencils, or
Well, right now I just do graphite. I'm still trying my inking style, my inking method, I guess. And I have a terrible habit of dragging my hand across.
well, the easiest solution is to not drag your hand. Like if you draw with your arm above it. But if that's too hard to break that habit, because it is for me too, I admit.
I have that habit. I don't press my wrist or something like that. And this and then this.
Yeah, no, me too. I understand that. What you might want to use is a harder lead, like a 2H or a 3H. That lead is hard and won't smudge as easy. So, yeah, H. Like if you notice on a yellow number 2 pencil, it usually says HB on that. That's a medium grade pencil. It's not too hard, not too soft. So any of the H's, think of H standing for hard. So the higher the number next to the H, the harder the pencil lead will be, which will write much, much lighter, but also won't smudge. All right, so yes.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'm tying it a little bit with like his thing about organizing story. The thing is, okay, art, yeah, no problem. My big, huge issue is like, okay, coming up with a story, and so what I'm going to do. So, I mean, now you were saying using note cards and things like that. Would you like put things like characters and settings on a note card, and then do like, and then write out like story beats, like to describe what, like a scene or sequence or whatever?
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. When I start a story arc, I have on my board, my first column are the characters that are going to be in the arc. The next column I have are the locations the arc is going to take place on. And then, exactly what you said, the beats for every issue. So issue 1, I want these things to happen. Issue 2, I want these things to happen. And I just have the major beats of that, each story kind of put down.
So you have the major beats for each of the story arcs, and then you create sub-beats for each of the main
Yeah,
story arc beats.
I usually do one story arc at a time, because I find I might come up with an idea that might totally change what the next arc will happen. So I just do one arc at a time, and then I do the individual issues in that arc.
No, but like, I mean, but that's what I'm saying is like, okay, fine, you've got like, let's say you've got this one story arc, and you knock out like what, eight main story beats of that arc, and then you break down.
Yep, that's exactly how I would do it. Yeah.
That's where I'm kind of like sticking.
Oh, okay.
That's my major issue is like, okay, what are some strategies to come up with, like, in terms of story ideas, and then, like, just to get the juices flowing so that I can sit there and like, okay.
Well, yeah, to get the kind of the same answer for both questions is to just write down any and every idea down. That kind of not only gets the juices flowing, not every idea is going to be gold. So if you write down an idea, maybe it's not a great idea, but it might lead you to a better idea. So just write down everything until you hit on something that really is like, oh man, this is really it. This if I can go here to there and just keep going. And you don't know, if you just stop and you feel like, oh, I don't know where to go, and then you just stop it there, you're never going to move forward. So you just need to write anything. It doesn't, even if you spend 3 days on an idea and you end up not using any one of those ideas, it might lead to the idea that you will use. So just you have to work through it. The same thing with writer's block, artist block. You have to go through it, you have to work through it. You can't just stop there and be like, well, I'll just wait for it to go away. It's not going to. You have to work yourself through it. And the more ideas you get, the more ideas will spawn. One idea will spawn 2 ideas, which might spawn 3 more ideas. So you have to just keep working through it.
Like sit there for a week and sit there and going, okay, for the entire week, just write the pitch ideas.
Yeah, one time I wrote out an entire script for a comic, and then I finished that. I had that last page reminded me gave me an idea, and I rewrote the entire issue. So that one idea will lead to another one that could lead to a better one. So that's just how you have to go. So, any other questions? Okay, let's take one from on this side here.
I know your comics is both paper and digital online.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a difference how you lay out your page as compared to web comic and then to your printed comic?
On the web, I use it, well, actually, I reformat on the web to go panel by panel just to make it easier to read. Me personally, when I'm reading a comic online, I hate having to scroll down to read it. So when it's panel by panel, it's easier just to read. That's my personal preference. When it's on formats like Comixology, they do everything. I just send them a PDF file, so I don't have to worry about formatting that. Yeah, so that I start with formatting it for the comic book printed page, and then I'll just modify as it needs to for whatever other format that needs to go. So you've had your hand up for a little bit.
How do you get out there?
We live in a great age of digital printing. Like 30 years ago, if you came up with a comic idea, you would have to get Marvel or DC to pick up your idea, or some small printer that no one's ever heard of. But we live in a time where there are so many digital printers, there's digital formats. It's easiest now than ever to get your book out there. So for single issues, I recommend Kablam. Kablam will print up your book, really affordable. And they have a sister company called Indie Planet. So when you upload your file to Kablam to print for yourself, you just check a little box and they'll put it on their store on Indie Planet. And then you just direct people to the link, and when people buy it, Indie Planet will just send you the difference. You set the price, they have their printing costs, and whatever's in between, they'll give you that money. Amazon is great. Create Space is practically the same idea. You'll upload the file, they check it to make sure it fits the printing formats, and then they'll put it up on Amazon for you. Comixology now is personally my favorite comic distributor. They're a little more discriminating, where Indie Planet and Create Space will just put up whatever you send them. Comixology will review it and make sure it's up to their standards. So you might be rejected, but if you have proper spelling and grammar and all that stuff and it's legible, chances are you'll be okay. And they'll put it up on their format for people, and they'll even make that little guided view for free. They don't even charge you anything for that. They'll make that neat little animation going from panel to panel. So the idea is, so there's just a ton of different ways. There's Lulu. I'm not terribly fond of them, but that's a way to go. What other sites do I have them on? There's graphically.com. That's another digital comic site. You just upload it and just tell people where to go to find your stuff. So, you have a follow-up there?
Yeah. Sorry. And will they copyright it, or should you copyright it?
You should. The way that the copyright law is as soon as something comes into physical creation, it is copyrighted by you. So as soon as I physically made this page, it is copyrighted by me. I do recommend registering your book with the Copyright Office. So even though your book is legally copyrighted the second you make it, it can't hurt to have federal recognition, have the government recognize that it is a copyright material. And in case anything pops up where someone's ripping off your book, you can just say, hey, look, here's the certificate that it's a copyrighted thing. So, so I do recommend it, but it's not like you have to do it or you're going to lose everything, you know. So you've had your hand up for a little bit.
I actually know of a cheap and dirty way to copyright if you're interested.
Is it the mailing your
Yes.
stuff? That technically will work, but it's not. There's the fact that you can just create it and it's copyrighted. All you have to do is have some kind of documentation. If you put it up on your website and say copyrighted, 2014, it's copyrighted. There's nothing. That site is proof that it's been created, that you created it, and all that stuff. You can do the mailing your artwork to yourself, but
That way you have a federal stat saying you can scream about this day.
yeah, and it's true, but it's so cheap to copyright things. I think it's $30. I'm sorry, what was that?
I just think this is $35 to copyright anything.
Okay, so
Copyright also like works, but copyright is not, it's not protecting the actual name or the actual name's trademark.
yeah, exactly.
Material, the name of whatever it is, it's trademark just said.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't copyright names of things. You can trademark it, but the work itself though will be copyrighted. So you have your hand up, so might as well keep on going.